if you're part of PMN, you likely are some kind of music maker, or you write music or something like that. And we all believe in the personal transformation that occurs with us, first with us, and that there can be a transformation of others. And I heard this podcast on MLK Day. Ezra Klein interviewed a guy named Brandon Terry. Brandon Terry is a Harvard professor. He studies Black political. He talks about Black political thought. It was a very eloquent, beautiful conversation. But the way that Ezra he positioned the context of Martin Luther King's philosophy, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing quite a bit, but he said that that Martin Luther King believed as much in the transformation of the individual when they started to get engaged civically and through civil disobedience, that they had a transformation that was based on things that they would promote through the civil rights movement: dignity and respect for themselves. That kind of transformation that the individual would go through, as much as he had interest in systemic change. And those two things, the transformation of the individual and systemic change, is what really we're gonna hopefully address with this. I mean, maybe that's lofty. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I really appreciate everyone being on mute. There it is. Okay.
And we will have a place for questions and answers like after the presentation. So maybe, make notes for yourself if there's something you want to ask so you don't forget, but we will definitely have plenty of time for that later.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Okay. So this is the overview of what we're going to cover. It's really very simple. Since there's almost 20 of us here, 17 of you are I don't know. We're going to go through just a little exercise so everybody has a chance to express who they are. There's too many of us for us to do individual introductions, so we're going to do it through the chat. Then I'm going to talk about this foundational idea around barnstorming, and how that was the kind of the motivating factor for me to go create this small group of folks who are social justice artists who try and use our performances for good causes. And really what we try and get to is that, and not just artists, but all of us. You don't have to be an artist to use these kind of ideas. Anyone can do the things that we're talking about. So first, let's talk about us. If you can open your chat, and I'm going to open mine, just so I can make sure I get to see what's going on a little bit here. Let's go back here. If you can just put your name or what performance name you go by, whether you write songs or not, if you're a performer, and then in terms of activism, I'm assuming that, because it's PMN, that most people do some form of activism. If you can just, maybe you can write one sentence, just make it really simple, like one sentence about the way you view yourself in terms of activism. I use my music for and shows for good causes. But then the one thing that I really want to get out of this is to find out from all of the people here, if you had to pick one of these issues that surround us, which one rises to the top? Which is the thing that is that motivates you more than anything else? And there's a reason why I'm asking that question. So if you can just take a few minutes to do that, I'll go and I'll start talking a little bit about this Billy Bragg quote. In 2017, I attended my first Folk Alliance. I did that because the topic of the Folk Alliance was it was how to use your songs for getting people engaged. That's what I thought. And Billy Bragg was a keynote, and I love Billy Bragg, so I went and attended. And Billy Bragg said this during the keynote speech. In one sense, we all know, I started off by saying, we believe that art and songs can transform us and the people we communicate with. But, the best songs ever written, what they can do is they connect us in some emotional way. They can help us, reach some level of empathy, but it's not, it doesn't give us the toolkit that we need to make a difference. And that's what this statement from Billy Bragg did. And he's got a lot of different versions of this. He's got, songs, bands, music doesn't change the world. And then he's very eloquent when he goes and he puts, really nice things. But this changed the context for me. Like I think I was in the mode before he said this, that I was really trying to figure out, like, could I write the one song that could do it? And then, I started thinking about Imagine. I don't know if anybody else appreciates that song, but, to me, that song is, it's such a beautiful statement of a vision for society. And then I thought about what's happened since that song. There's been a lot of really, really terrible things that have happened since Imagine. I don't know. Are we closer to John Lennon's vision? I mean, the fact that I think you need a vision, but you also need practical steps to get there. And, do we look to artists for that? I don't, I'm not saying that we become the organizers to bring all the tactics, but I think we can do a better job is really the big thing. Okay. So I see that some folks have been putting stuff in the chat. I don't want to cover too much before we get through. So is everybody taking some time and writing a few things? Yeah? Okay. All right. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about what we ultimately did. In 2020, I went back to Folk Alliance in New Orleans. And I mean, Folk Alliance was in New Orleans, so I had to go. So what I did is I decided that I had this idea and I was going to kick it off with an announcement at Folk Alliance for this group called Face the Music Collective. The way that I was thinking about it and how it's panned out is that this is not a formal organization, it's a collective. We're just a group of volunteers. We really don't have a structure. We just share ideas on how we can do better in making a difference. I think that's part of the spirit of what we do in PMN and other groups. But it was really so that we really can focus on how we can be more effective. And then I had this idea that we would actually write it down in a guide. We ultimately did write it down, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. But the way we kicked it off at Folk Alliance is we had a showcase, and we had Eliza Gilkison and Chris Matthews, and I mean, just the people who performed in that showcase. We had about, I think, over 30 folks performing in the showcase over the weekend. It was just such a beautiful, beautiful moment, and it really did kick off what we ended up doing. Okay. All right. And then finally, we, the core, and I think using the word that's up there is important, the organizing principle that we go by. And when I talk to people who are activists, this kind of resonates with them, that it's really simple. I mean, like I talked about with the Women's March or the March for Science, or all of the people who poured out in the streets after George Floyd was killed, or when you do a performance for a specific cause, or if it's not a performance, what if it's, a poetry reading, or it could be not even having to do with art. Every time we bring people out, every time we have a Zoom meeting, I think figuring out how, looking at the audience that comes to your event and figuring out how they can have the biggest impact. And then it's not just that one time, how do you get people, on that, as you'll say, as the people who are in grassroots organizations, they'll say, how do you get people on the first rung on the steps for the volunteer engagement? And that's the idea of the organizing principle. So this all started when I heard Becky Bond speak. Becky Bond and Zach Exley were two folks who were in the Bernie Sanders campaign, and they came up with this idea that they called barnstorming. Now, barnstorming is a tactic that's been around for a long time, but the Sanders campaign They tested it, they changed it, they came up with a really, really effective tactic during the campaign. So they had this problem. The problem was that they knew they had people who were enthusiastic, and I'm just using this as an example. We don't use barnstorming like they use it, but it certainly was a point where when I understood what they were doing, I felt like there was an opportunity. So that's why I'm telling the story that they told. So they had a problem in the campaign. They had people were really enthusiastic about the Bernie Sanders presidential run, but people were not responding over email. That's still the case. So they decided to have in-person meetings. They would have like 200 people, 300 people, 500 people come to these meetings. And then what they would do, they wouldn't spend time talking about Bernie Sanders' campaign promises or platforms, because the people who came to that meeting, they were already bought in. They didn't need to waste the time because people already wanted to do something, which is the name of my album from 2020. They wanted to do something for the campaign. So they said to the folks, hey, what Bernie Sanders needs is he needs people to do fundraising parties. Who wants to throw a fundraising party? And in a room as big as 500 people, they got 5 people to stand up. They asked them to come to the front of the room. And then they said, okay, what you're going to do is you're going to write down the date for your fundraising party on those whiteboards behind you. And they did. And they said, okay, let us know if your fundraising party is going to be public or not. And then they turned to the rest of the 495 people in that room and they said, okay, the rest of you are going to come to one of these parties. And what we're going to do in a minute is you're going to come up here and you're going to put your name on that whiteboard. And you're not just going to do that. You're going to put, hey, can you bring paper plates? Can you drive people? Can you bring drinks to the event? What can you do to help out? You're going to write your name and you're going to write, what you can do to help out for the event. And then they had about 20 minutes of mayhem. Now, of course, we're not going to do that during a performance, but they documented what those people can do, and then they followed up afterward in a methodical way. And that is how the Bernie Sanders campaign grew and became successful and broke the mold for grassroots organizing. I think those two, Becky and Zach, did an incredible thing. And they wrote it in a book. The book is about a lot of things about organizing, but that tactic, I think, is a really interesting tactic that we can learn from. Okay, so what we did in Face the Music is we took basically a different version of that tactic that we can do during performances, and it's a really simple thing. And basically we just came up with 3 steps. It's really, really simple. So I think most of us who use our shows for good causes will probably do the first 2 steps really naturally. We'll want to do a show for a cause. We'll find some organization that we want to support. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll do fundraising, right? We'll charge tickets and we'll do fundraising for some event. And that's fine. I think we can still do stuff like that. That's a really valid way to do things. But another approach is to, when you're starting to think about the 3 steps, when you're starting to think about the show that you want to do for a good cause, you think about, okay, who is the partner or multiple partners that we can bring out for the event? And then you have, the second step is to really have discussions around what that partner needs, especially if it's a grassroots partner. What can they use volunteers to do? What can they use the event for? And then structure the show for that. And then this is the novel part of, I think, what we bring as a group, is that last third thing, is that during the show, we come up with ways to direct the audience with a call to action for what they can do with the highest impact of things that they can do. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. And I'm going to say, you can do this for any cause. You don't have to use it for the way that I've used it over the last 5 and 6 years. And a lot of the artists we have, there's well over 80 artists who are, signed up for Face the Music. Again, it's a loose collective, so we don't have regular meetings. We don't have a board meeting. Nothing like that. It's a loose collective. But people do it for all causes. I have chosen the electoral process as a way for my activism. And that's how Laura Sue and I connected, and that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of this. Okay. So I think, we all care about a lot of issues. We're multidimensional people. I care personally about every single one of these things on this list. I do. I care about voting rights because voting rights are foundational for all other rights. All rights depend on voting rights. Without voting rights, we can't make progress with all these things that's on the list. As Laura Sue encouraged me to include campaign finance reform, it's also a foundational piece of what happens with all these different areas. I care about every single one of them. And, so Laura Sue, when you were looking at what people were writing, what did you find?
Yeah, we have a wide range of people, almost all songwriters, as well as a few other roles, and definitely a wide range of, I think people have mentioned just about all of these issues, and a number of people mentioned several issues that are really super important. And it's so hard to say, well, this is my most important issue, but that depends on that. That depends on that. So yeah, it's we feel the same way.
Yeah. And I can't even I can't disconnect some of these issues from each other. Some of them obviously they have an impact on they're I guess you would use the word intersectional, right? So I made a decision that with my activism, I was going to focus on electoral work. But the truth is that electoral work is really, really complicated. It's very challenging, right? There's the federal government is 3 branches. Then there's federal, state, and local. Where do you focus your activism? If you're an independent, unknown artist. And so I made the decision because I was working with a group. Again, I was working with a group that focused on state legislative races. I decided early on that I could probably do shows for state legislative campaigns. But again, there's just, it's almost, there's over 7,000 different elections on every 2 years for state legislative races. It's how do you decide which ones to target? Well, so what I did is I decided to work with specific partners like Every District and Sister District Project to figure out which are the right races in the right states with the right candidates that actually had a chance of winning. So that was the first step, is that
I think you should tell people what Sister District and Every are.
So Sister District Project is a grassroots organization that focuses on winning state legislative races in specific areas that they feel that they can make progress. Mostly, they have kind of 3 strategies. One is to flip the state legislature from Republican to democratically controlled. The second is to make progress over the long term with states where there's not much democratically elected officials, where they can't turn them right away. And then the third prong of their strategy is if there's a fragile democratically controlled state legislature, they invest. And they use remote tactics mostly. They do fundraising, make phone calls, write postcards, some text messages, things like that. Very standard. Every district, they focus more on fundraising, and both of them endorse specific candidates. And that's why they're instructional for me in how to choose the right races. And now I know a little bit more. I mean, we don't always choose candidates that can win, as we'll talk about. Sometimes there's other things that I make decisions on supporting races for other reasons. Like if you're going to run against someone who's accused, and there's really kind of seems like there's lots of evidence of them being doing really bad things. I'll just leave it at that. Then sometimes I'll focus on that race as well. So the other thing about state legislative races, besides the fact that, like as a individual performer, I can probably have discussions with them. I've proved that I can have discussions with them, have a show that actually does have an impact on their race. Then it turns out that state legislatures across the country impact our lives in a much more significant way than the federal government, right? They pass 23 times more laws than the federal government that affect people's lives. And when you focus on a state legislative race, they have an impact on statewide and federal races as well. So that was the rationale that I used. And it turns out that you can have an impact, much more profound impact, the more you target, the more you're smart about which races you choose. So I'm showing this because both in 2016 and 2020, there was a lot of votes in the presidential election, but it turned out that it was a very few number of votes in a very small number of states that actually made the difference. And if you just look in 2020, 45,000 votes in 3 states made the difference. And in 2020, we ended up doing shows in all 3 of those states online. Was it us that made the difference? But we at least participated in doing those. And I'm not saying that these are the states that we would target. It'll be different in 2024. But this is what we chose to do. So again, what I chose to do is focused on state legislative races because that was what the way that I thought I can make an impact. And now I'm going to talk about a little bit of the history of what we did and what the impact was. And sometimes we had an impact that was it was the one that we wanted, and sometimes the shows didn't go so well. but each one of the shows, every single show was positive, was heartwarming, was just a beautiful experience. But I started out in Florida, whereas as I mentioned earlier, I grew up. I put together a 4-show tour. I targeted, and this is before I kind of understood trying to figure out which shows, which candidates, which districts to support. I was just figuring out if the show concept that I had would work. So I did 2 shows in Miami, a show in Fort Lauderdale, and one in Palm Beach. And frankly, 3 of those shows, not so great. The show itself, they were okay. The 2 shows in Miami, one show, the candidate didn't have a chance, and people came out, which was great. It was it was at a Greek restaurant, and I got a little PA system from someone who lived there locally that was really terrible. It was not great. The second show was at the Luna Star Cafe, which is a wonderful venue. I'm really glad I did that show there. But the person who we were supporting, she was not running against anyone. So, why do the show? But that third show for Emma Collum, which is what the poster is, it was at a small music show in East Fort Lauderdale. Emma was the founder of the Florida Women's March, and a dynamic candidate, a dynamic person, like an attorney. She put together a real campaign. And because she had a real campaign, she had people that she was going to bring out and go knock on doors. So what we did is we decided to do the show at this small music store called Penny Lane. They have a raised stage and lights. They gave me a really great microphone. And, but everything came together. This was one of those transformational moments in, my music life, in my life. And so they probably brought between 60 and 80 folks. I really don't know because I wasn't really counting things at the time. But they got a large number of those people to volunteer to go knock on doors for a campaign. And even more so, I'm up on that stage and I'm looking out and I knew some of the people in the audience, some of my friends came out, but most of the people I didn't know. And I got to play for people I didn't know, which was also, a beautiful thing. But I know that show I connected with people, that whatever happens when we perform and you connect with people, that was a moment for me where I knew that this thing could work. And so the following year, I decided to go bigger. Like, how can I have a bigger impact? So Virginia is one of those states that has off-year elections. It's not a presidential election. It's not a midterm election. So we had invested in our volunteer work in 2017, made a lot of progress in the state in electing Democrats, but 2019, we didn't know what would happen. And so I put a 10-show tour together from Virginia Beach all the way to Northern Virginia, Manassas. And you could see on the poster, there's a whole bunch of different dates. And we created a template, a format. And the format was, oh, yeah, don't worry about all the dates on there and all the locations. Anyway, so we put together this format. And the format was really simple. I tried to pull in a local artist, someone who knew people, could bring in other folks. Didn't always do that. But then between whether it would be me or open or they would open, that wouldn't matter. And then we gave the candidate or candidates, so sometimes we supported multiple candidates, short speaking slots. The idea was that we were trying to encourage people who would not normally come to a political event, that they would come to a music event that had, a common set of themes around politics. And it worked. It worked in a really amazing way. So there's little old me, and I teamed up with my friend John David Coppola, who's a bass player, and we toured the state together. The two of us got more than 100 people to go knock on doors for these campaigns. Now, knocking on doors for a political campaign is the most effective thing you can do. And, I can knock on only so many doors. And I did. I knocked down a few doors, but I could not knock on as many doors as we got people to knock on doors. That was an enormous learning. But even more so, the second part of that learning was the people who, like barnstorming, the people who came to those events were more likely to volunteer. We got a huge percentage of people to go knock on doors. And that was the germ of, that was the core of what we did. Yeah, we raised some money. So, but raising money was not the focus. And raising money is, I would encourage you to continue doing that in your shows, but it wasn't the focus, and it doesn't continue to be the focus of what we did for these shows. So what we learned is that we can recruit folks when we do these kind of things. And the tactic that we used is that when people would walk in the door, or if the event wasn't structured that way, the people would walk in, the volunteers from the campaign would walk around with clipboards and get people to sign up for a specific date to go canvassing, to go knock on doors. And that was that we got them to make the commitment during the event, like barnstorming. So, and the other thing that we learned was around partnerships. So here's that poster again. I created this poster because there's one of the people who founded this organization called Network Nova. It's a grassroots electoral organization. Her name is Stair Calhoun. And Stair asked me to create this poster so they could put it up in their conference that they put on, which was great. I was like, okay, that's nice. I'll create a poster. It's a lot of work, but I'll create a poster for our tour. It's nice to have a tour poster. And so she, and then as we're like going back and forth, she says, hey, can you turn that poster from portrait to landscape? Can make it horizontal. And what we're going to do is we're going to send out postcards. And I'm like, right, you're going to send out postcards. Well, they did. They sent out 2,000 postcards. And not only that, she connected me with artists. She organized a house concert at her place for one of the candidates that she wanted me to support. Didn't have a chance of winning, but I was totally up for doing it. And the other person that we worked with is a guy named Bill Bannis. He was the chair of the Virginia Beach Democratic Party. One of the biggest challenges that we have with these specific shows is finding a venue, and he found different places for us to play. He connected us with campaigns. He also put us up for the week that we were down in the Virginia Beach area. And so housing was not a cost. But partnerships were the thing that we would learn. And now, what was the impact? You know, we got people to knock on doors. We showed that this process, this model can work. But there was something else that happened in 2019. At the time, both chambers of the Virginia state legislature were very close in terms of Democratic versus Republican. And there was a Republican governor in 2017. Well, in 2019, a Democrat got elected to the governor's mansion, and both chambers flipped. And then a slew of legislation occurred, and people's lives changed. And I'm gonna walk through this just to get the impact of, you know, when we started out this presentation, we said, what are the things that we care about? They raised the minimum wage. Through Medicaid expansion in Virginia, more than 200,000 people got access to health care, which saved lives. They passed laws for LGBTQ folks. They decriminalized marijuana. They enacted really effective, you know, gun control laws. In Virginia, it was one of the places where people were buying guns and using them in crimes and killings in other states. Virginia, previous to 2019, was the place where they killed more people by the state than any other state, and they no longer have capital punishment. They have a slew of laws around making voting easier, including they got rid of the Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson Day, and they replaced it with Election Day. They passed laws around reproductive health for women. They focused on funding transit, and you know, for me, one of the things that drives me is around climate change, and they passed sweeping laws around climate change. I don't know about any of you, but you know, I played a small part in this, but I know that we played enough of a substantial part that I felt like, you know, between this and the other activism work that I do, I felt like I actually played a role in making a difference. And this may never happen again. Laura Sue?
Yeah, I just want to comment in case that's clear that replace Lee Jackson Day with Election Day as a holiday, right?
Yeah, it's an Election Day holiday, right? Yeah, thank you.
Really say that exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly. Yes. So yeah, this was a seminal moment. Okay, so then we continued working, and I actually went that stack of postcards. That person who wrote and took that, she took that picture and she wrote a lot of those postcards was Linda Allen. She lives in Northern Virginia, and she's got another place in rural Virginia, and that's where I met her. And she's a lovely person. She helped me with these shows. In 2020, because of the pandemic, like everyone else, I moved online, and I decided I was going to work in as many places as possible where there was competitive districts. So I did a ton of shows. It was a ton of work. You know, a side note, my wife, she decided she was going to take a job managing a campaign in Arizona. And so I was like by myself during the pandemic. I was alone in my house, and I was the most productive I could possibly be. We raised a lot of money. And again, you know, like I think, you know, there's so much money in politics. I don't think that that's the primary motivator for me, but it's also important for campaigns. I think more importantly, during a pandemic, we were using the internet to build awareness for campaigns. But I think we learned a whole bunch of stuff. First of all, I did a lot more outreach to try to find artists from the state, from those local regions, to bring in people. I ended up playing shows with Willie Porter and Seth Bernard and Joe Newberry and Scott Cook. I mean, I got to open for all those people. It was an incredible experience. All those shows are online and on our website, and it's just this amazing set of things that we did. And then the other thing that we learned is that, you know, when you're doing something online, just like we're doing here, interaction on the chat is really important. So you put, you know, links that people can donate or volunteer their time. You put, you acknowledge when someone is doing there. You have multiple people volunteer on these online shows. And then I want to spend just a minute talking about this one show that we did for the Equal Rights Amendment. So through these shows, I met the president of the ERA Minnesota, or ERAMN as they call themselves. And she asked me to do a show. I'm like, okay, sure. So we ended up finding a common call to action that we can then reach out to all the organizations, ERA organizations around the country. And we ended up getting 40 of them around this common call to action. And one of those organizations had relationships with a bunch of very well-known prominent people, as well as we reached out to other folks. Sean Lennon, Kathy Richardson from Starship, formerly known as Jefferson Starship, the lead singer of Everclear, and others, really phenomenal artists participated in the show that we put together. All in all, we had tens of thousands of views for these shows, for all these shows. And that means that I played for tens of thousands of people in a sense, right? I got exposed to a bunch of different audiences. Little old me, no one knows me. I'm just a guy with a guitar. That was 2020. And while I'm doing this, I'm reaching out to Laura Sue, falls into 2021, and we've been exchanging emails. Okay, so before I get to 2022, Laura Sue and I had been talking over email, and the first time I said, hey, I'm thinking of coming to Florida to do a series of shows at some point. And Laura Sue sent me this exhaustive list. I mean, artists, activists, and it was like, I could not believe. So I took all that information and I put it in a place where I'd remember it. And then we started working together. Like really, we talked through how we would do this. And again, I figured, okay, so how can I step this up a little bit? So in 2022, I decided to not just do a tour in Florida, but also in Arizona. So we did 4 shows in Arizona. We decided that we were going to now go beyond state legislative races and target some statewide races. And then in Florida, we did 7 shows in 7 days, which I don't recommend anyone at my age do. Please do not do that yourself if you're over 60. It was so much fun. It was beautiful. Regardless of whether each candidate won or lost, we built community, and we connected people who hadn't been talking before. We got artists involved in shows that they never had done anything really political before. They're still talking to me and still sending me, they're still connecting me on Facebook. Laura Sue and I are still talking to them about them doing their own shows for different causes. It could be for anything. But also, we supported, I'm going to mention 2 of these races. One is the Val Demings show, the Val Demings campaign. She was running for the US Senate in Florida, and Chris Mays ran for the Attorney General in Arizona. Let's start with Chris Mays. So Arizona is ground zero for voter intimidation. It's in the southern border of Arizona is where we heard all of those news stories about kids being locked in cages, about, they had the show me your papers law where Joe Araprio, the horrible sheriff there, would lock people outside in the heat after he would detain them. It was just horrendous what was going on there. I did a show in Yuma. From the stage of the place that we did that show, I could see the border wall that they put up. And that show was another transformational moment where we just built community in a place that there was just fear before. And people came to that show that wouldn't come to political events before. It was a beautiful moment. And we did a show in Phoenix for Chris Mays. Chris Mays, there's about 2.5 million votes. Chris Mays won that election after a recount by just over 200 votes. We played a role in that. We played a substantive role in Chris Mays winning that election. But we won, but we did a lot of shows. We've done like 80 plus shows for campaigns now. And, but the show we did for Val Demings, I think, is the most important lesson. And it's the the lesson that I like to spend a little time, but first I want to celebrate what we did. So I figured the right way to do this is to show pictures of the events, because there's so much joy. Yes, we recruited volunteers, but the show on the left was the show for Val Demings, and there's Laura Sue, and Piper and me, and that's John Elliott, who we recruited to play with us in Florida. This was such a fun show. We ended up getting 350 people to sign up for Val Demings' campaign. This show, two of those shows in Florida were not for campaigns; they were for climate coalitions, and the one in Gainesville was for this group called Let's Talk Climate, and we had a ball doing that show. It was so much fun. Then these are pictures from Arizona. This is me and my buddy John, right about to start our show with the orange sunset that looks very much like the Arizona flag. There's Chris Matthews, who played a couple shows with us. Walt Richardson, a local guy who played. This guy, Jevin ran for Congress, and he came up short, but he is going to stay in the game. He's going to win the next time in a district that I don't think a Democrat has ever won. And anyway, so and this is another picture of that Yuma show. And then on the right hand side, these are more pictures from Florida. This is I don't want to spend too much time, but we raised some money again. Again, the money is not the thing, but we got people involved. We got new organizations involved together. And then finally, again, we used that same model where we gave people the opportunity to get up and speak. In the campaign shows, it was the candidates who spoke. In the climate shows, it was the organizations that are doing really good work. We tried to encourage those organizations, when they got up and spoke, to include a call to action. And I got to say, it didn't work as well as it has in other events, because I don't think that those organizations were really geared for it. But they built community in places like Pensacola, which is where our last show was, where it's really challenging to be a climate activist. And then this last picture is just some pictures from the Luna Star Cafe show in Miami, which was so much fun. Anyway, yeah, and then finally we did get people to sign up for 100 people to sign petitions for a clean water ballot initiative. So here is the key takeaway, the key learning from the Florida tour. So for the Val Demings show, Laura Sue and I started talking about all the people that she knew down there, and people that I know, because I've done some stuff down there. But Laura Sue's network is vast. Finding a Laura Sue in wherever you're going to do those shows is the most important thing you can do. And we had so much fun, and it was so much work. But this is what we did. So we first, and I think Laura Sue is going to go through this in a little bit of detail, but I'm just going to, at a high level, we reached out to a core set of folks, and then we got them to meet, and then together we said, okay, what do you want to do? What candidate do you want to support? They said, let's do a show for Val Demings. So we decided to support the candidate that the group wanted to support. It wasn't Pete's decision, and then we built a strategy to get the campaign on board, and then to reach out to a bunch of different organizations. My theory was, and it proved out to be true, if you think about all the planks of the Democratic platform, or another way to think of it is all those things that we care about, all that list I showed in the beginning of this presentation, every single one has multiple organizations that they have a huge mailing list. They have people that they don't tap to do these kind of things. And we could reach into those organizations if we build a program, if we build a way to communicate with them where it's going to meet the things that they want to accomplish, right? And that's just what we did. So after we brought together, one of the people who volunteers was someone who's not a musician. Her name is Sue White Beasley, and Sue, she just decided that she was going to dedicate herself to go making this thing happen. So the three of us, this was three people at the core who did this thing. Three people, and I mentioned that three people. It's not the three of us who ended up uh, doing everything. There were a lot of people who contributed, but it was the 3 people who drove it. And Sue reached out to, after we built a database, with a Google spreadsheet, Sue reached out to each of these organizations with an email. Then where we had phone numbers, she followed up with phone calls. Then she sent them another email. Then she made another phone call. We reached out to over 200 organizations, and those 200 organizations filled our venue with people, both venues that we did for the Val Deming shows. So what we realized is that this tactic can be used. We can, bring potential people who are not engaged, but they care about one of those causes that we talked about earlier. So there's capacity there in each of those organizations that we can reach into. And because we know that when we get people into a room, we can, get a high percentage of them to volunteer for some action, we can actually turn those people into volunteers. So you have some, before I step into the document, Larissa, do you have any comments, or do you want me to go into the document?
I think this is a good time to bring up, something that I heard a while ago at a Sierra Club meeting, and I'm putting a link in the chat with an article about this, that, there are a lot of these great organizations whose members actually do not vote. Like this article references that they did some research and discovered there were 15 million environmental voters who were, very environmentally committed, but did not vote. So those are people who don't need to be convinced about the issues, but are not voting. So just, that's relevant to this point about grassroots organizations with membership who do not engage civically. That's exactly demonstrating that. And I had no idea that that was the case, until I heard that. So, this issue of partnering with organizations is very, very, has a lot of very specific impacts.
And there's obvious value for the organizations, especially when the grassroots organizations, right? The music events could just be, a music appreciation thing, or they can recruit volunteers. But, think about what their objectives are for the organization, and then, talk to them about what they want to achieve, and how can, the folks who are, they have a mail list, they have a membership list. How can those people help achieve their objectives in an event? But then for us as artists, it achieves so much for us. It's really great. It's like a way for us to achieve what we all want to achieve. So Laura Sue did a really great thing. She documented the exact steps that we took specifically for our allies, artists and activists program that we built. Do you want me to go to the document itself, Laura Sue? Or?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to get out of this. I believe it's this thing. Nope. It's this one. Okay. There you go.
1 second here to refocus myself. And also, thanks to everybody who's putting comments in the chat. Yes, lots of very interesting things. And, I see people are involved in so many interesting things. Okay, so I'm just going to build a little bit on what Pete has said. One of the things that kept happening when we were organizing these shows, I've organized a lot of shows in my life as a musician, just, music shows, benefits, all kinds of things. And I think, probably a lot of us here already know basically how to organize a show. But when we were doing the shows here, I was, I played a leading role in organizing the 3 shows that were in South Florida this year, which were, 2 of the, just in case anybody's confused, we used 2 of the same venues. We did one at Luna Star Cafe and one at Penny Lane, which Pete also mentioned in reference to the previous tours. And then we did a 3rd one at what was the name of that place?
The Century Village.
Yeah, the Century Village show. So I was really involved in that. And as we were going along in this process, I kept thinking, oh, we didn't, we need to do this. We need to start the PR. We need to do, I just kept thinking of, because we didn't have really an outline of what we were doing. So I I just thought, well, I'm just going to do one now for this workshop. So what I did was I just made a basic outline. And if you just scroll down a little bit here, Pete, I just made a basic outline of how to organize a show, the basic elements. Get some performers, a venue, a date, a sound system, do some PR. I sort of did that. And then we added all of the elements that you have to do what we're talking about, a Face the Music show. And we put those in green. So, just to be clear, like it's like organizing a regular show plus a lot. And, we have made this available, or let me just get the link for this. You can download this yourself. And I'm going to also be adding to this document. So, come back in a few months because there's going to be more in this document in a bit. I'm going to be adding some details, and then probably eventually we'll make a super detailed document and have a really specific workshop for how to, if people want it, you feel like after this workshop, yeah, I want to do that next campaign cycle. We will probably do another more detailed workshop and also maybe create a support group so that we can all work together and share technical information and expertise. So anyway, if you, look at these places in green, hold on, this just, talks about some of the process, like this first part here, identify potential activist performers, partner organizations. That was the thing, I sent Pete, as he said, I sent him an email with, I don't know, 50 or 100 contacts, just people I just happen to know, and their email and phone and who they were and why they were important. And then he put all that into a spreadsheet. So when we actually started meeting, I'm looking at the spreadsheet and going, oh, this information looks familiar. These are all the people I know. And like Pete said, if you can find yourself a Laura Sue, find someone in your area who has just been there for 20 or 30 years, loves to network, knows everyone, almost everyone. I know people from like the executive director of the Broward Cultural, whatever it's called, Arts Council. I know tons of individual musicians. I know people in political groups. I'm just kind of like all over the place. If you can find someone like that to just give you the contacts, not to necessarily follow up with them. I mean, it was great because like Pete said, we had Sue, who's a friend of mine. And, I had posted about this on Facebook. Anyone want to be involved? She put her hand up. She didn't know any of these people. She just took my contacts and she did the follow-up. So if you can find someone who has those kind of contacts, and, in some cases, I would make a personal email if it was somebody who either didn't respond or someone we really wanted to get engaged. I would send them a personal email, with whatever needed to make that personal contact. But Sue did most of the follow-up. I'm not really that great with follow-ups. It's very helpful to, what you do is you see here, identify people's specific skill sets and let them do what they're good at. Don't make it this thing where like, okay, you have to do this, you have to do this. Get a range of people. One of the people who volunteered turned out to also, have a really good contact at Luna's Star Cafe, which we already had booked. But he does open mics and showcases there and runs sound. So he was like the perfect person to do that. We didn't make him get in touch with, 8,000 political activists. That wasn't really his thing. But he did get in touch with the police department who are across the street from Luna Star, because we thought we should let them know what we were doing just in case some bad people showed up to disrupt our event. So identify what people are good at and, have them do that. So yeah, these are just various steps in the process. Now, when you're working with partner organizations, you really do need to identify the important dates for them. When do their newsletters come out? When do they send emails? What else are they willing to do? Can they post something on their website? Who do they know that you should talk to? Like, there's just a whole other level of things, and you need to allow time for them to do those things and to get them the information that they need in order to send an email, put something in their newsletter, put something on their website, all of that. So that can take quite a bit of time, advanced time. And, honestly, in South Florida, I felt like we didn't we didn't really start some of those things as early as we needed to. So you kind of have to, make a timeline for yourself in advance. Like, well, when do I actually, how many weeks or months before the event do I actually need to do this?
You know,
And next time we do this, we'll have a better timeline. Go ahead.
and Laura Sue, I just want to make a comment that, look, you don't have to do all the things that we do. As an individual, or if you team up with just one or two people, you can do one event. We took on a very big project, and that this whole model is really just designed for you to decide how big you want to go, and then experiment and decide how much you want to do. But I am going to say also that we're thinking of how we can have a bigger impact in 2024. We're thinking this year in February how we have an impact on the election for 2024, because there are Laura Sues in other battleground states, in metropolitan areas, that have a network that we can help guide them to do these kind of things. And that's what we're actually starting our planning process now to go do that.
So yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, please don't be intimidated by this in any way. But just maybe scroll down, see if there's anything else I want to give any comments on. Right, you can have people table at your events. It's just an opportunity to reach out to organizations and connect, and to give them an opportunity. It's not all about what they can do for you. It's like, well, what can I do for your organization? Media. No, wait, hold on.
Yep.
Yes, show schedule, as we said, and as John noted, short speaking slots. That's very important. Identify volunteers. Another thing that we did that was, I've seen it many shows, and we did it at most shows, is we got all the performers together to do a closing song.
Mm-hmm.
That was, it's some really kind of uplifting and heartwarming moments doing that.
It was fun. Totally. It was a great way. It was like much more of a show when we did that.
Yeah, and that takes a certain amount of work to like pick the song, find something that's manageable for everyone to sing without a ton of rehearsal, to actually agree on a song. Pete and I did not have the same idea about what those songs should be.
We ended up using, so Brant Miller, one of the guys who toured with us in Florida, great songwriter out of Nashville, award-winning songwriter. He wrote the song called Get Out the Vote. And so we ended up using that song for almost the rest of the tour after this, because it's an easy sing-along, and it is the right message. So beautiful song if you want to hear it.
We didn't use that for any of the self-storage shows. I rewrote, a song for one of the Val Deming shows, and we used, what was the name of that other song we used? East Side, West Side. We used
East Side, West Side, beautiful song.
We had a few. But that's a good opportunity to, maybe take a traditional folk song, rewrite some lyrics, something, relevant, or maybe one of the original songs. It should be something that's kind of sing along and brings everyone together. So that's my basic outline of, how to do a Face the Music show. And
yeah, I think you have this link already in the chat. I see some people are already there. This is going to be available to you. And what I like about this is that I think it's digestible. And I think that having a more detailed thing, and if you have questions about it, we'll be glad to answer those. So let me go back here. That's most of what we wanted to talk about, but I wanted to bring up a couple of different ideas that you can bring to shows that we've used and still are testing. I did a climate show. I organized a climate show at the Golden Gate Band Shell in Golden Gate Park, San Francisco. It was a really fun show. We had a lot of bands. And the thing that we tried in this show was we had a local art group create a 5-foot by 5-foot QR code. It turned out to be beautiful, and then it took folks to this website. We had about 25 to 30% of the folks scan the QR code, which is in line with what we learned with a predisposed audience for our 2019 tour. But frankly, the thing that didn't work was there's too much information on the website. It wasn't clear in the call to action. It needed to be much more succinct, and we're going to continue to experiment with this idea. But using QR codes seems to be a really good thing to do, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how I'm going to utilize that. Secondly, this idea is not a Face the Music thing, but I think it's a really interesting idea that you can use with events. So back in 2017, this might be 2018, we started a whole week of action that we called Resistathon. The idea is that you start out with a fun event. It could be a music event, but we started with just a social event at a bar for the first series of events. The second events were an art show, and you can see some of the examples of the art in the middle of the page, with this whole coalition of organizations. And to organize this, it's not that complicated. If you're putting an event together, and you're inviting organizations, what you do is you just organize your main event, and then you have each of the organizations organize the subsequent days for the day of action that they're going to be responsible for. That's exactly what we did. So this is some pictures. So we gave each organization an opportunity to speak. So you see someone speaking there, a very short 3-minute, hey, we're sister district. We're going to be doing some postcard writing at the bar across the town. And on Wednesday, please come and visit. And actually, and here's some more art from the art exhibit that we had. And then here you can see, this is the whole week of action that we did. I can't see it because it's covered with the videos. Let's see. So here you see phone banking for Arizona with Sister District on Tuesday. Then on Thursday, Sister District did a postcard writing thing. Friday, Ladies of the Resistance did a music event fundraiser, and then Swing Left did canvassing the following Saturday. So those are, and each one of these organizations, they plan their own event. On Sunday, there was postcard writing, texting, and phone banking, and that was done by Democracy Action. That's all that they do. So we took their capability and we asked them to do the event that they're experts in doing. And we recruited hundreds and hundreds of volunteers in these two events. It was a remarkable thing. So look, you don't have to do this, but it's another piece of the toolkit, another option for you to use. I put this as an opportunity when we had the climate shows. I said, hey, rather than just do the big climate show, look at it as an opportunity to do a whole week of action. And they didn't buy off on it. You need to have a dedicated group that really is involved in grassroots action in order to do that. And I have one more thing to talk about, and that's Music Declares Emergency. And the reason why I'm talking about this is we're going to take a lot of what we've learned in Face the Music, and this organization is going to use those core tactics to work with very prominent artists. Music Declares Emergency is a music industry climate organization. They started in the UK back in 2019. They now have 6,000 people who have signed their declaration. The declaration basically says, we want people to act. We promise to act as individuals, and we want our governments to act, to take action on this climate crisis. And what I really like about this organization is that, first of all, they have huge acts like Billie Eilish, The Pretenders, Annie Lennox, and a whole host of people. But they have the whole music industry. They have promoters and festivals and producers and artist management companies. And on their website, they have calls to action. The calls to action, they're explicitly designed for each one of those constituents of the music industry. So as an artist, they have very specific things that you can do. And they also have calls to action for fan. And one of the things I'm going to do with this organization is we're going to take those calls to action for fans, and artists are going to use them in performances, right? And we're going to do kind of that modified barnstorming approach with the most significant artists in the world that want to go do this. And it may be a small number, but if we get Billie Eilish to do it, that changes things. And I think we will get Billie Eilish. I mean, no promises, but Billie Eilish's mother just came to one of our events, and she's already signed a declaration, and she's already talking about climate change in her shows. So Billie Eilish, that's 30,000 people a show. So look, I don't know where all this is going to go, but I think that there's an opportunity here. I would also ask everyone here, please sign the declaration. It shows support for the organization. It also, it's a way for you to get access to calls to action, which I think are, what we've been talking about, calls to action specifically for climate. I really like this organization enough that I've been involved for the last year, and I'll continue to be involved. So,
And,
all right. Yeah.
and as a board member.
And a board member. Yeah. I just, this week I was elected to the board. So, of the US chapter. I forgot to mention there's 14 chapters around the world now. So it's growing. Okay. And one more thing, when we kicked off the discussion around Face the Music, we said it's a guide. And we actually wrote it down finally. So this is going to appear in a book that comes out in October. Susan Ehrenrich, this is the second volume of this particular primer. And we'll have a chapter in it. And so all the things that we talked about, not as explicit as we've talked about in this workshop, but a lot of it will all be there for you to, written down. And then, if you really want access to it, I'd be glad to share the chapter with you. But I recommend, reading it. Cy Khan, who else? Holly Near, Joe Jenks, and other really amazing activists in the folk world will be writing chapters in this book.
And they also just put out a call, which I think I posted in the email group, for people who want to write something for this. There's still an opening for more people to contribute.
Okay, so just to review, we talked about that core idea of barnstorming and modified barnstorming, and we, structuring events or performances to have an impact, right? That you guide potential volunteers to actions that have the most impact. That building partnerships with one or more organization, with allies, with a whole bunch of different artists, and with core activists, you can have a much bigger impact. And then use the tools that we talked about. We talked about QR codes, maybe the week of action like the Resistathon. But the core idea of the Face the Music is really simple. And that's the thing that I would leave you with, is that partner with an organization for a good cause, then construct that show to support the cause, building that as a true partnership, and then during the show, construct and then provide explicit calls to actions so people can sign up and make it as public as possible as you're doing that. So that's the core idea of what we've been doing. It doesn't necessarily need to be music, all kinds of art.